Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays talking all things leadership. And today we are talking about self awareness. Why does it matter? And what you should be doing to make sure you are using it to the best of your ability, how to get it, etc., etc. So, Robert, self awareness. We've talked about this a couple of times, and one of the things that just continues to recur to me is that we are never quite as self aware as we'd like to think we are. Some opening thoughts.
I muted myself. We are not as self-aware as we should be. I almost said would like to be, because some people don't want to be self-aware, but we are not as self-aware as we should be, and it can cause real problems. And I have one story to tell for sure, that really highlights that.
Should be, could be, would be, right? Shoulda, woulda, coulda. And it's an important leadership skill, trait, characteristic, all of those. And personally think it really is at the top of the list, right? And we talk about lots of things that it would be great for leaders to have: skills, characteristics, traits, etc. Lots of different things, but self awareness sort of is the foundational piece. And having that allows you, one, to sort of build the other things on top, as well as the discussion of our leadership framework. Simple, right? And so there's a reason that it is first. Not that simple is logically, it's not laid out in a logical, you need to do this and this, and it progresses that way. But I certainly think that the self-awareness is a foundational piece for leadership, but for life as well.
I almost interrupted you because when you said it's a really important leadership thing, I was thinking it's a really important life skill, because as you go through life, you really should have an awareness of where you are, how people perceive you. And a lot of people don't have that. And they're shocked when they find out, and I know we're going to talk about this, when they find out how they're perceived by how they are perceived by others is vastly different than how they perceive themselves. And that can be a
Absolutely.
real problem. And it could, it can cause you to do a lot of things that will really harm you in the long run.
Absolutely. So let's start there, right? The self awareness is foundational. It's a foundation of what I would like to consider to be conscious leadership, to be a self aware leader, to be an authentic leader, right? We talk about authentic leadership a lot, not just you and I, but sort of in this world we talk about authentic leadership, and it's a little difficult to be authentic if you don't have awareness around who you are, what you're about, and it can then present that if you don't know what that is. And so you can't lead what you don't understand, right? And so you need to understand what's driving you, what your beliefs are, what your emotions are. And emotions, particularly in light of emotional intelligence, and that being a highly touted leadership skill, If you are not aware, and this is something that you bring up frequently, your assumptions, your mental models, right? If you don't have awareness around what those are, your biases. I did a training yesterday, female leaders, and we talked a lot about bias, right? The internal and external biases that we have around uh, gender leadership in the case of the leaders I was training yesterday. But understanding what those are, what your mental models are, where your blind spots are, what motivates you and what triggers you, and having awareness around those things allows you to do a couple of things. One is to address and make improvements where you desire, where it would be helpful for you to improve your leadership prowess. Um, and, and so that awareness piece, you can't, I'm going to use air quotes for, you can't fix what you don't know is an issue, right? And so there's that part. But that awareness, and you brought this up about how you impact others, how others perceive you, and whether or not that's something that you want to do anything about. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we get into sort of the discussion about internal and external self-awareness. But right, it starts with understanding yourself, your motivations, the beliefs, your assumptions, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about what is the driving force behind your actions. So if you're just doing things without any kind of conscious awareness, then you're not self-aware.
Right.
And so it's really about aligning your values so that when you're doing things, other people will see that you're authentic because they know you've made your values hopefully known to them, and they'll see you acting on them. It's also a real cornerstone, as you said, of emotional intelligence. You really need to have an awareness about what's going on inside you, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. You mentioned what triggers you, and I mentioned what's sparking you or what's motivating your actions if you're going to be an effective leader. Now, certainly over time, there are things that you're going to do pretty much by rote. You know, you have your leadership
Yeah.
style, and those things will just come out of you because you've for lack of a better word, practiced leading in this way. But it really stems from understanding what's going on inside your head, why you are doing the things you're doing. And the other byproduct of this is when people see, and I mentioned this earlier, people see that you're walking your talk, it's really going to build trust with them because they'll see you as being authentic and not as someone who's, leading, leading. Um, I call it, I have a lot of different derogatory words for it, but leading based on what you see or what you think other leaders do. The loud voice leader. I told you to do it, kind of in your face leader. Those things are not effective.
So two things came up that, and I'll start with primacy, right? The last thing you said, which is that, certain things not being effective. And that sparks for me the importance of, and this actually ties into the first thing that sparks for me this thought about you cannot be as effective as you want to be if you are not intentional about what it is that you're doing. And it's difficult to be intentional, authentic, etc., if you're not aware of the things, the values, your priorities, what your purpose is, or what it is you're trying to accomplish, right? What your vision is, etc. And without awareness of those things, then it becomes difficult to achieve those things, as well as it makes it difficult to build good relations with people, because you need to be aware of what about you works for other people and what doesn't, so that you can make adjustments. We, aren't talking specifically about communication here, and we've done some episodes on communication, but if you're not communicating in a way that your receiver receives, right, then you're not communicating, you're just talking at people. And without a sense of awareness about your style, other people's styles, and your need to make adjustments, it becomes difficult to communicate. If you can't communicate, you talked about trust, you can't build trust, you can't build relationships, and then you're not going to be as effective in your role as a leader as you could be.
It reminds me of something that drives me crazy when I'm having a conversation with somebody, um, or for lack of a better
Not
word,
me, right?
not,
But
not
not
you,
me.
or
Okay.
for lack of a better word, an argument. You and I don't argue, but we disagree sometimes, but we don't argue. But when you're having an argument with somebody and they say, I have something to say, which is a trigger to me because it means that they weren't listening. They have had this thought that they wanted to say this thing, so everything you said prior to them saying that was blah 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 blah, and it becomes a problem. And that's why active listening is so important. And I know this is not a episode about that, but if you want to know how you're perceived, you need to have conversations, and one of the best conversational tools is active listening, because it's not just about hearing what someone's saying, it's really being engaged in the conversation, so you can ask some really good questions so that you can make sure that you're on the same page with that person and understand what that person is saying to you. But a lot of times when you're and let's go back to self-awareness. If you're having a discussion or a heated discussion or argument with somebody and you're just talking, and they say that, well, let me say this thing to you, you weren't paying attention. So that happens to me as well. It's like, okay, I wasn't paying attention, as well. I wasn't engaging in my self-awareness to know that, hey, I need to back off a little bit. This person is seeing me as somebody who's just talking and not letting them speak. So it does give you data. So you need to, be aware of that.
Absolutely. Right. And that sort of leads into that having self-awareness allows you to recognize your patterns,
Yeah.
right? And then to intentionally choose how you present yourself, rather than acting, as you mentioned earlier, out of habit. And over time, it becomes very easy to, particularly when we find something that works, to continue doing that thing that has worked until we find maybe that it no longer works. And then we're forced to reevaluate. And I would suggest that, and we'll get into this later in the, in our offer for moving forward with working with either of us, is making that a regular habit, is to check in, all right, with yourself, and make sure that you are staying aware of yourself and what's working and what's not. But it starts within, and it has to be something that is um, a willingness on your part to look at what you do, why you do it, asking the questions, being curious, and doing some level of self-reflection, self-introspection, in order to get some answers. And then, of course, there's going to be the other part, which is being okay with getting some feedback. And so one of the things that um, is important to recognize is that being unaware of your leadership can create chaos. right? And leaders who lack self-awareness are tend to do some things that create problems. That they will project, right? They'll blame, um, avoid feedback, hearing feedback, and micromanaging. And I have shared this particular story before. I'm having a conversation with a boss that I had in the past, and it, she was giving me, I guess you could say, feedback, right? She had taken a letter that I had written and had made some changes to it that I did not agree with, right? And it substantively and grammatically. And so substantive, we could sort of debate the efficacy of what I thought was a way to go as opposed to the way she thought was a way to go, strategy, etc. Right? The grammatical stuff was much easier because there are style manuals that tell you what the right what is proper for the kinds of writing that you're doing, whether it's an AP style guide. In California, I use the court style manual. There are different tools that are used that make it clear how to communicate something, grammatically or structurally in a letter. But she had her own style. It was a problem. And so it started there, but we're having this conversation back and forth. And I made the comment to her that I thought she was micromanaging. And she said, well, I'm not micromanaging. And I'm just like, but you are. And it wasn't a heated debate, but we got into this thing, and it's like, if you don't understand, and I explained what I felt was micromanaging, and she's like, no, I'm not a micromanager, but everybody on staff felt that she was. And so, right, not having some awareness or even a willingness to explore something, particularly when you're getting feedback, right, creates chaos, and it makes the people on your team resentful. It erodes trust. It can make people feel unsafe, or I would say minimally, I was confused because, and we would sort of laugh about this amongst the staff, is that some of her personal style guidance, like, that doesn't even make any sense, right? You don't spell out numbers in the middle of a sentence, right? You don't capitalize something just because you feel like you want to capitalize them. And there are people that we know currently that capitalize all kinds of things. It's like, why is that capitalized? Right. And so it creates confusion and chaos. And so being willing to sort of take a step back when people are sharing things that with you about your style or how you're impacting them, it becomes really important to be willing to hear what people have to say, because the last thing you want to do as a leader is to create chaos amongst your team members.
Yeah, and I was laughing because every micromanager says I'm not a micromanager. I've never met one that says, you're right, I'm micromanaging you, and here is why. Because there is a time and place for micromanaging. We talk about it all the time.
Yes.
But most of the time, people that micromanage are people that they have a control issue. They have to have things done a certain way. Yeah. I've seen managers go so far as to say, do it any way you want to, and as long as it gets done, and then we'll complain to the person because they didn't do it the way they wanted them to. So micromanagers usually don't have a lot of self-awareness, and it can cause a lot of chaos. And that was an example. And we were talking about, I know that part of what we're going to talk about is external versus internal self-awareness, but that's an example of external, self-awareness, is using external data,
yeah,
to help inform how self-aware you are. And when you mentioned, when you told that person that they were micromanaging you, one of the possible ways they could have handled that is by saying, I don't feel like I'm micromanaging you. Tell me what I'm doing that makes you feel that way. Or, how am I micromanaging you? Let me know, right? And that would have informed how aware they are, as to how they're being perceived by others. But a lot of people, when they see micromanaging or hear micromanaging, it is such a negative term to them that they automatically reject it. And we've talked about this, and I just mentioned there is a time and a place for micromanaging. Unfortunately, people that are chronic micromanagers, they don't know the time and the place, because that's what they do all of the time.
Right. And it is funny that you say that, because I actually was very clear and upfront about what I thought was micromanaging. And one of the challenges in that particular situation was, again, we were in disagreement about the edits that were being proposed. And I asked specifically, are you telling me to make these, or are these suggestions? And the response was, well, I'm the, whatever her title was, right? She says, well, I'm the, and so I would think you would, right, take the,
You would be
then these are not, then these are not suggestions.
You would be a robot and just do what I tell you.
Then these are not suggestions, and you're directing me, which is very different than a suggestion. So, and if you're directing me, then you're micromanaging, because one, you're wrong, but that's another thing for another time. And so let's shift into this discussion about sort of the internal self-awareness, external self-awareness. And internal self-awareness, just briefly, really is about you understanding your values, your emotions, thoughts, right? Again, patterns, what your strengths and areas for growth. I won't call them weaknesses, but areas for growth, right? What it you could look at it as sort of your inner compass, right? It is what guides you. External self-awareness is about understanding how others perceive you. And you've brought this up a couple of times, right? It's about how you're perceived by others, and how they experience you. And we could look at this, if internal self-awareness is your inner compass, we could see the external self-awareness as a mirror, right? It's what others see. And so it's the reflection of you back to yourself, if you were to take the time to look at it yourself. And why this matters, and as I was thinking about this, I have a theory, and we'll get through this, and then I want to bring up this theory that I have, see your thoughts on it, and your, as the audience, your thoughts on it, right? You can leave drop a comment, and let me know if you think I'm off base on this. But that having some clarity about the inner compass and how others are perceiving you makes it possible. Again, you can't make adjustments. You can't change or address things that need addressing if you're not aware of what those things are. And so when you don't know what matters to you, it's very easy to be taken off track, to go down a path that is out of alignment with who you profess, espouse to be, right? With your values, with your emotions, and to be easily taken off track. Whereas if you have clarity about those things as things are popping up, and you mentioned the trigger earlier, right? That particular trigger that you have, understanding that allows you to be proactive, which is what I think becomes really important, is that as things start to unfold and there you have that little sense of unease rising within you, you can capture it earlier in the process so that you are able to be responsive rather than reactive.
Yeah, and that's key. You really choosing how you want to respond to those situations uh, versus react to certain situations is huge, especially when, and I know you mentioned trigger, we both have, you're in those situations that you have an idea may be problematic, or when someone catches you off guard, and that's when self-awareness, true self-awareness, is really tested.
Hmm.
When you know your triggers, you can be prepared, right? You know that this person, or that the situation or the circumstance, this person may be difficult for you to interact with, or you have a team member that's difficult to interact with, and they may say certain things. You can prepare for that.
Yeah.
It's when someone that it comes out of nowhere, and you feel yourself reacting in a certain way. That's why I work with my clients a lot on understanding what's going on inside their body,
Mhm.
because there's usually an early warning system inside that lets something's going on, you're about to be triggered, and you're about to react, and to give yourself that delay so you can engage your self-awareness and your consciousness and make the proper response to the
Mhm.
situation. And the proper response, whether it's effective or not, is the one that you think about and engage, not the one that you do a knee jerk. It's not a knee jerk reaction. It's something
Right.
that you think about and you respond. It may be effective, it may not be effective, but at least you've given yourself the opportunity to respond versus react.
Absolutely. One of the things that sort of in the research that came up is that we tend to, and this is one of those areas where being lacking self-awareness doesn't mean you have no awareness at all, right?
Right.
And so it reminds me a lot of confidence. And there are very few of us, I believe, who have like zero confidence. Even if people say, then, and the verbiage tends to be, and I hear this with my clients, I'm not confident. And that's not true. Situationally, you may not be confident in some things, but most of us we're confident in various areas, and self-awareness can be very much like that. And so when we're thinking internal self-awareness as opposed to external, we're probably have self more likely to be self-aware internally as opposed to externally, or externally as opposed to internally, right? And sort of this thing that came to me, and so I want to test this um, theory. I have no data to back this up,
Okay.
just my experiences and observations, is that on the whole, on the whole, that men more often exhibit some internal self awareness, but lack the external self awareness. And by that, I mean that they are more likely to have some awareness around and some assurance around things like confidence, their ideas, their values, the direction, their vision, what it is they want, and are less aware about how their presence, how they show up, their tone, their behaviors affects or impacts other people, or sometimes even care whether it does or not. And women, on the other hand, are more likely to be more highly externally aware, sometimes to the point of projecting what other people feel and think about them that it isn't even like on the table. And then struggle a little bit with that internal awareness and clarity about about what really matters, their values and priorities, etc. Thoughts?
Hmm. So
I
let me
want
say,
to explore what, regardless of what your answer is, it's something that
no,
I
it's
want to. It's something I want to explore. So
I
just
think we should definitely explore this because you brought a lot of things are running through my head. So here's the thing: if men and women, male and female, however, I don't know how you, I think you said men and women, are experiencing, then they don't have true self-awareness, right? Because if you're projecting, like say with the women, start there for, if you're projecting what other people are thinking about you or feeling about you, then that's not true external self-awareness. That's projection. And I think that you're really onto something here. I think that you're right that that happens a lot because that's how people are socialized. With men, on the other hand, this is really interesting because I know how I think, and I've had training in this, so it's not. But I have a lot of male friends that they think they're being self-aware, but they're really not. It's like, well, no, that's not being self-aware because you just have this idea, right?
to go
You
along with that. Yeah.
yeah, you pre-programmed this response to somebody. It's a response, but there is no room for adjustment,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, I'm going to say this to this person because I know that's how they're going to show up. And a lot of times those things, and this is just, listen, there's no empirical data on this. This is just my experience with some of my male friends, not all. The thing that they are, the way they respond is usually pejorative or negative. It's
Okay.
it's usually in that, it's usually a defensive kind of thing. Um, in reaction, and I've done that myself. Like, I'm not saying that I am so evolved, but I've done that myself. But I think that you're onto something. I wouldn't say it is true self-awareness because there is, in the case of men, the way I see it, they don't leave any flexibility for, oh, okay, I
Mm-hmm.
misjudged that. That would be true self-awareness, right? That was my response to this person, but I completely misjudge it. Let me take another tact on that. Usually what happens when my male friends, some of them do that, is they double down on what they did. So therefore they don't want to back out of what they said, even if you can show them that they were incorrect. So, and it's a
No,
generalization we're making.
I could get with that. And again, right, it was just something as I was preparing. I was like, I wonder if there is, a difference in, I'm going to say the genders or the sexes. I don't know which one is the appropriate way to characterize that. But if there's a difference in sort of in what I see in my clients and others, people that I've worked with, how do I see it differently? And I think you are right that a lot of it is not as much about sort of true self-awareness, because that projection piece or an unwillingness piece. And so maybe I need to go back to the drawing board on my um, thesis.
No, but
Thing. So,
I think you're onto something though, because there is, what I think is what's going on there is a certain level of bias with
mhm.
both men and women in that, because and I think that's worth exploring as well, because we've seen it, as someone who has raised, girls. I see that, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
well, this part you're thinking, I'm not thinking that, right? Or this person's thinking that, and I'm like, well, how do you know that they're thinking that, right? And we will
Right.
explore that. Well, they did this, that, and the other thing. Well, could it be they did this, that, and the other thing it wasn't related to you at all? So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
their bias
Yeah.
that they're putting on. But on the other hand, I have
Masquerading as self-awareness.
yes, and we all do that.
Okay.
We all do that.
Absolutely, right. And there's a social conditioning that is underlying a lot of the way we behave anyway, right? And
Absolutely.
with men taught to project confidence and be assertive with their opinions and to lead with authority. And so there could be some buying into something that isn't, as you say, there's not real true self-awareness because they don't really have that. There's just the projection of this thing that is supposed to be there. And so it again, maybe it's just masquerading as that, but not so much.
Well, it touches a lot of things. It touches a little bit of self-awareness, but it also touches on imposter syndrome
Mm-hmm.
and biases and things like that. I have a friend that will have a conversation, and we'll be disagreeing about something, and he'll say something, and I'll be like, "Well, no, it's like this," and I was like, "That's exactly what I said." And it's like the thing that he said before was not even remotely close to what I said, but so I have to
I
be
think
like,
I've talked to that person before.
no, well, it's a thing that some men do, right? So, and I'm like, okay, now how can I? And so from a self-awareness standpoint, I have to say, okay, I know or I have an idea how this conversation will go if I start to point out to this person that what they said was categorically different from what I said. So I don't do that, right? So I just go, okay, and I move on. Um, I do have to pick my battles
True.
when I engage with this
Yeah.
person because it's a close friend, but that's how they think. And you know, and as and let's make this real. As somebody who is engaging in self leadership, and that involves not only with the team at work, but with your friends and with your family, you have to really decide when you need to push a point. Sometimes it's not, you don't have to fight every battle.
Right.
And so, I had to engage myself because that's a trigger for me. It's like, dude, you said something, we're doing this ego thing again. So I have to let it go, right? Because that is, pointing that out to that person is not going to solve the problem.
Right.
Sometimes you have to, I hate to say this, you have to lose the battle to win the war. It's like, okay, fine, let that one go. I'm not, but I don't think that people that do that are really truly being self-aware, because when that person does that to me, I know is that they don't like to be wrong. So that's an ego thing. Right?
And a self-aware person would know that there's an ego thing within them, right?
Right.
So yeah.
But it's really
Yeah.
funny, and I had that this episode when you said you're right. I was like, oh, it felt so good. I said, oh wow, that's really interesting. Right. So what was more
I'm
important?
glad I could help you with that.
Yeah. Feed my ego. But it was really interesting, and I caught myself doing that. I was like, why did that feel so good? Right? When it's really the conversation that we're having. Because the fact that you brought that up, and you see how excited I got about that, because I'm a research and data nerd. That was the real gift, right? Was the conversation. It wasn't the oh, you're right thing, but there it is, right?
Well, that you have awareness around that says kudos to you, and a little bit of internal self-awareness
Stop giving me compliments. You're feeding the monster.
wrapped in some external self-awareness. So real quickly, and then let's move to sort of our last point is how you can build internal self-awareness, external self-awareness, right? Internal, again, we talked about internal, they're the things, your values and priorities and and your emotions and thoughts and patterns and stuff. And so exploring those through practices like journaling, meditation, right? We've talked about these in and broad strokes in other episodes, but reviewing your day, right, to help you see where you were aligned and where you weren't, taking the time for some internal reflective exercises and external awareness. And you can get, I guess, both of these through both of these practices, but I'm going to separate them a little bit. The external self awareness really comes through feedback, right? And having regular conversations with people that you trust to help you to explore and reveal your blind spots, right? What are the gaps between what you intend and the impact that you actually have? Because it's easy to make assumptions that what we intended is what actually happened. It's a whole other thing to take the time and to ask people, did this land for you? Did this come across the way that I intended? And there has to be a willingness to not be defensive, right? And to just be open and give someone a safe place to share. Otherwise, if you shut them down or get defensive over time, they're going to stop. They're not going to be will unless they're um, maybe someone who is steeped in confrontation or something like that. Most people are not going to continue to give if they feel like it's not safe for them to do so.
Yeah. Another tool that people can use is the Joe Harry window. I think we've talked about that. It's when you really analyze and you get some data from other people about the things that may be unknown to you. So it has four quadrants: what's known to you, what's known to others, what's unknown to you, and what's unknown to others. Because there are some things that you don't want other people to know. So everyone has those four quadrants, and it looks like a window when you map them out. But it's a really good way and a good tool to really look at how. And there are some things that you want other people to know. I should say that. You can cherry pick and share those things that will help you build relationships with those people. But you can also use it to understand how other people perceive you, and how and some things that you're doing that you don't know about, the things that are unknown to yourself. I think it's really important because a lot of us have that. I mean, all of us, I should say, have things that we do that perhaps we don't know about. And those things don't put us in the best light when it comes to other people.
Sure, sure. Right. A couple of questions you might consider asking, what's true for you right now? It's like, what's true for me right now? How did this come across? XYZ, whatever it is, an interaction, a conversation. How did this come across? How did I come across? Right. And what am I not seeing? Right. And so the just samples of questions. And if you start to ask some questions and sit with yourself, other questions will come, and it will bring up situations, and that will allow you to start looking for the patterns, right? What are the patterns? What are the things that you do over and over again in certain situations? You respond this way or react this way, other times some other way, right? Look for the patterns and then ask yourself, are you being effective with how you're showing up, how you're interacting with people, how you're behaving? And if it's effective and you're getting the results that you want, then kudos. Right?
Absolutely.
Kudos. But if not, it creates an opportunity, right, for change. Creates a little opportunity for change. And so, and it's that space that we're going to move into now, sort of that where you've got this opportunity, you have some space to look at where change is possible and paying attention to things like, right, it's real easy to react, right? Reactions come fast. They're automatic. They come from sort of your inner, and maybe it's ego, maybe it's some other things, but it's like something happens and you're like, "Rah," as opposed to responding, which is much more intentional. And what we, and I'm going to talk for Robert, and if he disagrees, he can correct me. But one of the things that we want for you and hope you want for yourself is for you to be more intentional about how you're leading and thinking through how you can become the leader that you are capable of being and the leader that you want to be. And so re- being responsive is an intentional thing, right? Self awareness, having awareness around, again, your values and the triggers and your thoughts and emotions and all of that, it allows you to stop, to pause, to evaluate, right? And then to choose how you actually want to respond, particularly when the stakes are high or when emotions start to get involved. And, decide, do I want to be calm or do I want to be rabid? Right.
Mhm.
I came from, in my world now is much more even killed, but I came from, right, immediately before the work that I do full time now, I came from a world where everything at least felt high stakes. Everything wasn't, but the people that I worked with, everything, that's what it felt like. Right. And so everything was always like on edge. And I would say that that was the during that time is that when I really started to learn how to sort of manage my emotions in interactions with people, right? I'm negotiating things that are, highly important. I say, everything felt high stakes. But the things that I was working on, legislation, public policy, affects millions of people, right? And wanting to get it right was very important. But there's the other part of that is that you can't be there all the time, right? So it took time and energy for me to learn that I had to pace myself and I needed to learn to choose my responses and not let what other people do or what they said, right, trigger me. Learn to sit back, just pause, evaluate what was being said, and evaluate whether or not it needed a response at all, let alone an emotionally charged one, right? And so being getting to a place where you say, I want to be responsive, not reactive, becomes really important part of what self-awareness will do for you.
I think that is so important and so very hard to do a lot of times. I think one of the things that makes it difficult is I know myself, I'm going to use myself as an example. I am sometimes reluctant to put myself in situations where I will be triggered, but that's what you need to do to be able to use that skill. Um, it is when I tell people all the time, if you really want to work on that skill, wait till the holidays and when you're visiting with your family, you'll have plenty of opportunity to use that skill. Because as we know, when we're around our families, no matter, not everybody, but a lot of us, no matter how we present to other people when we're working as leaders, when we're with our families, it's they know, if they don't know what buttons to push, they installed them, I should say. They installed the buttons. So even the hidden one that you don't know about. So it's a real opportunity to engage in those things. And I think that that is the key and the real challenge here is to be able to say, okay, this is a skill I want to be better at, but in order to be better at it, I need to actually engage with it. The saying I said, you can't untangle a knot if you don't engage with the knot. You gotta
Right.
get in there and start pulling it apart, or you're never going to get better at it. And I think that's the one of the barriers is, it doesn't feel good when you're triggered,
Right.
so
Right.
we tend to avoid it. I know for me, it feels horrible, but it's something that happens. And so one of the ways that we want to, for lack of a better phrase, normalize that feeling so that we can recognize when it's coming, and then engage our self-awareness so that we can have the proper response in those situations, in particular those high stakes situations when it really, really matters how you respond. And it will help your mental agility as well, because you won't get stuck and you won't have to double down on, I meant to say that awful thing I just said, because your ego is involved in it.
I love that. And the because one of the things that we'll do, I meant to say that, but we'll minimize it or downplay it. It was a joke, or right, something else that sort of let us off the hook. And this willingness to be in this uncomfortable space,
Yeah.
right? And one of the things, particularly when I'm training, coaching clients as well, but when I'm training and helping the managers, look at how to be more of a coaching manager than sort of a directorial manager, and asking questions, um, and helping their people get to a particular place is that they, one, don't have to have all the answers, right? But when they ask questions, don't be in a rush to answer the questions or solve the problems for their people, because of the uncomfortableness of silence,
Mm-hmm.
right? That pause, that space in between the stimulus and response, the event and the outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
That being giving yourself permission to sort of sit in it. And like you said, the it is that being in that space is being triggered that is going to help us to grow
Yeah.
through this. And so our tendency to want to avoid confrontation, avoid the triggers, so that we don't have to be there. This is where you're going to grow as a leader,
Yeah.
right? This is where you're going to be tested on whether or not the values that you're espousing are really your values,
Yeah.
right? Or your priorities are really your priorities. This is where you're going to be tested to see if all the thing that your walk, right, it is in alignment with your talk. And so we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable and sort of sitting in the space. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you go and you sit on a mountaintop and you're there for hours, right? It in the heat of the battle, in the heat of the moment, maybe it's just a short pause, but afterwards becomes the opportunity for you to do the reflection, right? Going back to earlier, to do the reflection, the journaling, the asking for feedback that helps you to evaluate what happened in the moment, right? To see how could I have done that and got closer to an outcome that I really wanted. Did I even stop to think about the outcome that I wanted, which often is the problem, right? Because we're so busy reacting, we haven't even stopped to think about what it is we want. And so while you can't necessarily think your way out of it, you can pre play and plan in advance for those situations. And I know I've shared this when I was, back when I was lobbying and on a couple of bills in particular, long drawn out processes, hours and hours of meetings and negotiating and wordsmithing and high stakes and people, emotionally charged in all of that, right? Sort of getting to a place where ahead of time, I was like, this is on my agenda today. I'm going to plan for the outcome that I want, so that as I was moving through the day, I'm consciously aware of what I wanted to feel like at the end of the day. Right. And because I was aware of what I wanted at the end of the day, it allowed me to make choices throughout the day that were more likely to lead me there than to just sort of fly off the handle, which is something that I was very capable of doing. Still, 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 still. But
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you for admitting that.
but much more willing to slow it down, take it down a peg.
That's
Just saying.
hilarious.
I'm just saying.
I think, it's something that one of these days you and I should talk about. I don't know how to phrase this, and I know we're running out of time, but choice versus programming, because some of what we do is because we're programmed to do that. I mentioned that, your family members installing the buttons, but a lot of that comes into play when you're a leader.
Yeah.
Or if you're part of a team. My saying, and we've heard me say this, and you've said it yourself too, is that people bring their whole selves to work.
Yeah.
Even when they're trying to pretend that they're not the person that that they really are. And those things come out. So there's some programming involved there, something that you and I should talk about perhaps on a Sunday when we have our meeting.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, you're right. We are running out of time. So, you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I love this conversation. We touched on a lot of things, and it really got my mind going and thinking about some different areas that we can talk about for episodes.
Awesome. And so, just so you know, we're going to be talking about self awareness for the rest of this month. We've got 3 more episodes. We'll be talking about changes that you can make, the team, things that you could do to model good self awareness for your team, etc. So, stay tuned. Look for us. Again, we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. This is the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. Robert, if someone wanted to reach out to you and talk with you, work with you to help them be more self-aware, how would they go about it?
They can email me at inspireme@Robert Hilliard Coaching, or they can go to my website, roberthilliardcoaching.com, and fill out that contact form. Let me know what challenges you have, what goals you have for yourself, and we can set up a discovery call and just have a conversation to see if we're a good fit for each other.
Awesome. And likewise, if you want to reach out to me, shiftingintoaction.now.site, shiftingintoaction.now.site, and we can see if we're a good match. And if we're not, and it's not for you and Robert, I will recommend you to someone else. I've got a huge network of coaches that might be more appropriate for you. So, again, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Whether you watch this live, watch it on replay, all right, drop a comment. If something resonated with you, let us know. Again, we'll be talking self-awareness for the rest of this month. And until next time, take care.
Bye now.